estimation, what is an accessible destination for somebody in a who's using as a wheelchair user?
Well, I think that accessible destinations are ones that provide information to disabled people so that they can plan their journeys effectively. So they have things to look forward to. Obviously, the CVB is not in control of all aspects of accessibility in their destination because there are many touch points. A traveler can have a bad experience if the hotel is not accessible, which I know will be discussed in a follow-up panel here. If there's a lack of accessible transportation options, that can create issues. But during my time, just using Fort Myers as an example, because it's recent in my mind, a lot of things worked there. The attractions that I wanted to visit all had adapted activities and features for me to take part in. And then, a lot of the outdoor trails and whatnot were accessible with paved pathways through some of the different parks and their trails, wooden platform walkways that was really a lot of fun to get out, really out in the middle of a forest or out in the middle of a swampy type area, the wetlands. I could do all of that in my wheelchair, and that was really incredible. Transportation was great. There was public transit that I could use, but also private transportation as well. Taxis had wheelchair accessibility available, and so that really is, I think, the key is having all of these pieces in place, but then also providing to travelers the knowledge that those features do exist in an accessible form.
And so this is the reason we're initiating the landing page initiative in terms of because there's an absence of information. So we're people in the audience to create a landing page for their hotel, their destination, their attraction. But let's just take the destination, since that's what you're talking about. What are the minimum pieces of information that should be organized on that landing page?
Yeah, well, actually, I have a lot of experience in building these because I produce travel guides for disabled people on my own website. And there are really 6 things that are included in every single one of those. One is information about the accessible things that people can do in the particular destination. Whether that's parks, museums, theme parks. We're in Florida, so we've got some cities here in Tampa. There are two major theme parks, Busch Gardens and SeaWorld. And so, yeah, information on what you can do, information on where to stay. So accessibility of hotels, and not just a statement of this hotel is accessible, but what does that accessibility look like? So I include photos, descriptions, measurements about the accommodations that I review in these travel guides. Information on transportation. So how to get around, what your options are, whether that's public, private, or something in between. There are a lot of destinations in the country where a higher priced service like non-emergency medical transportation is the only wheelchair accessible option, but making it known that that's the case. Sidewalk accessibility. There are a lot of a lot of us, want to get around in our wheelchairs or our walkers or with a cane. And so the accessibility of pavements throughout the city is something to have a perspective on. Was that 4 things I listed? I'm trying to think, what else do we share? I think those are the main things. Taxis, transportation, things to do, where to stay, what to eat. Obviously, I don't write a lot about food. I'm not very good at writing about food, but yeah, all of the businesses that exist within a community for the benefit of tourists and people who live there are things that people want to know about. And as we heard earlier, Google is trying to bring a lot of that information to its Maps application, but destinations can play a role in that as well.
So, yeah, so Christy, so this is Christy Durso, and she is a travel agent and a wheelchair user. And do you want to just introduce yourself in terms of the full package that you offer? In terms of, she's going to focus on autism today, but.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Christy Durso, and as he said, I am a wheelchair user. I have one child who has food allergies, another who's on the spectrum, and another who's cognitively and intellectually disabled. So that is kind of my perspective. And so when we talk about looking at destinations that are autism friendly, we want to look at destinations that provide places that have looked at quiet areas. And so my presentation for this, we're looking at, so this, what I have, we're not going to use this for this section right now, but we want hotels and destinations that are focusing on quiet areas, places that have more low sensory areas. When we're looking at, let's talk, since we are in Florida, theme park that are going to provide areas that have quiet areas where they're providing areas that are kind of out of the way, quiet, away from the crowds, some quieter places, access areas where they're going to be able to avoid the rides. Like Disney has their disability access system where they're going to be able to not skip the line, but they provide a disability access card where they're able to go up to the ride, get a return time, and Universal provides the same service. They're able to get a return time, so they're able to wait and avoid that line. There are lots of areas that provide this. Museums also provide this. The aquarium here in Tampa has once a month, they provide an autism friendly day where they turn down the lights, they turn down the music. And so they provide these sensory days where the lights are lower. Lots of parks are offering these days where they're just making it a little bit more sensory friendly, and they're making it so their areas are just lowering those sensory inputs so that children who have autism are able to just engage a little bit easier. And they're making their park maps where they're notating areas where there's a little bit less traffic and just making it just a little bit easier on those sensory inputs so the kids are able to enjoy, or adults who have autism are able to know where to go, where they might have a little bit of an easier time as they're enjoying those areas. And then also airports are starting to make areas where they might have an easier time. We've got the Sunflower Project, so they get that lanyard as they're going through the airport. So somebody might be, the people working at the airports can recognize this might be a person who has a sensory processing not disorder, but they might have an autism, they might be on the spectrum. So they know to recognize that this person going through might have autism, and they might need a little bit of extra time. They might need just a little bit of extra attention. So as they're going through the airport, they know that this person might just need a little bit of extra care and a little bit of extra guidance, a little bit of extra attention. So it just helps them go through the process a little bit easier.
Okay.
So.
Matt, can you talk about the destination specifically, just for blind travelers? What should they actually communicate?
So we're thinking about like amusement parks or activities like that when
Well, we're thinking about the destinations aggregating. the features that are,
Mhm.
the museums,
Sure.
say there's a
Yep.
museum that has,
Yep.
audio description. So
Yeah,
just, you know,
so
so the,
there's so much digital content today. Interactives, you know, you could go into a museum and have a map that's totally interactive. You could go in and find interactive, they may be a kiosk, they may be physical things. And the challenge is that a blind person can't read any of the things. So if we haven't added the accessibility to those things, including, guidebooks on how to get around. For many years, the museums in DC, as an example, would have audio description of the museum as you walked around. But what about the content they're showing? What about the movies? They're showing an exhibit on Martin Luther King. Shouldn't there be audio description? Because at some points they're not dialogue, and we need to be able to have it described to us so that we know what's happening on the screen and we can participate just like anybody else. And it's interesting to say, if you look at audio description, which is a big passion for me, but more and more people who are not blind are using audio description today because they don't recognize everything, or they're actually using it because they're using it like an audio book. And so they can listen to the show and have it described to them just like you would with an audiobook. And so just like captioning, I think that when we look at how captions have taken over for everybody, who's sighted, sometimes people turn them on just to watch TV because they can't hear it completely or they couldn't process it. Audio description has some similar values to certain people. So when I think of destinations, I'm thinking that we have digital content that's not always accessible. That's the apps you may use to navigate, the apps you may use to reserve something. You mentioned, registering for a time slot. Well, if that's on an app, could I do that if that app's not accessible? There may be food places that you have to now order everything before you go pick it up, especially under COVID. They don't want you standing in these lines. And so all of those things need to give me that accessible experience, because I can't always guarantee I'm going to have somebody around who can do that. And then the navigation, lots of space. And we need to have that stuff mapped out in a way that I can get from point A to point B without having to, as Mike put it, ask somebody for directions and here, I'm not from here.
All right. Thank you very much. This was a great group with terrific insights and stories behind them.